Welcome, welcome. All right, we are going to get started. So, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to talk with children's authors Daka Hermon and Lorien Lawrence. If you have questions for them, you can post them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the program. So, let me start by introducing each of them. Daka is the author of Hide and Seeker, and she was born in Tennessee and spent her childhood huddled under a blanket with a flashlight reading and writing fairy tale and fantasy stories. She works in the entertainment industry and is an active member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. She loves peach sweet tea, chocolate, cupcakes, and collecting superhero toys, and lives in California. Lorien is a writer and middle school teacher from Connecticut. She has a creative writing degrees from Wheaton College and Bath Spa University. And when she's not reading or writing, she can be found hunting ghosts with her family. Stitchers is her debut novel. So welcome both. Why don't we start with each of you telling us a little bit about your book?
Sure. My book, Hide and Seeker, it's about a group of kids who attend the welcome home party for a friend who's been missing for a little over a year. And at that party, they play a game of hide and seek. And the next day, a kid disappears, and then another kid disappears, and then another kid begins to disappear. And so there's this mad dash to try to figure out what's happening, who's taking them, and where they're going. And within that, there's also themes of like fear and grief and loss and friendship and what true family looks like and how it looks differently for different people.
And I wrote The Stitchers, which has a lot of similar themes to Hide and Seeker. It follows Quinn Parker, who lost her dad a year prior to the story starting, and he was always super suspicious of their neighbors, who they kind of nicknamed the oldies because they never seemed to age. And so after his passing, she wants to still feel connected to him, and so she kind of takes up where he leaves off and decides to investigate these creepy neighbors. And she pulls in her friend Mike, and they launch this whole investigation and end up finding out the truth, which is way worse than they ever expected.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm having a hard time pushing the button down to mute myself. I apologize about that. So I kind of want to start with scary books and kids, super popular. Can you talk about how you tailor scary stories for a younger audience, meaning just scary enough, but not scary enough to cause nightmares?
I think Dake actually said something a little bit about it in her introduction to Hide and Seeker, about how there's these elements of family and grief and friendship. And I think the friendship one is huge in middle grade horror, because you have to have heart for this age group. You have to have a bit of humor. You have to let the readers feel like there's hope. Whereas adult horror terrifies me because it always feels like it's really bleak and it could stay there. Whereas I think both of our books hopefully have, that element of hope that when these kids are working together, you really believe in them as the reader, that they can kind of make it through to the end. I don't know. What do you think, Daka?
No, I totally agree with that. And I know as a kid, again, I was really sensitive to horror and scary things. And so I always keep that in mind when I'm writing. And I also, you mentioned it, the humor, like to interject those comedic moments. If the tension is too much, or there's too much suspense, you cut through that with a little bit of humor. So kids aren't completely terrified or scared when they read the books. They have these other elements of the friendship and the humor and the wacky times to kind of take them out of maybe a scary moment. So they still feel safe and they feel like they still have a little bit of control even within the story.
That banter. I feel like your group of friends in Hide and Seeker did it really well, and I tried to do it with Quinn and Mike, that kind of back and forth, being a little bit sassy, teasing each other, but in a good nature kind of way. I mean, kids do that all the time, and so hopefully it feels, that element feels real to them when they're reading it.
And then also having like the mom and the grandma in your story too, to bring in those lighter family moments and those elements, I think really ground kids in those aspects too, beyond just the fear. And so that helps with the story.
Yeah, I was definitely a child that was allowed to watch scary movies way too early in life, and read scary books. I won't tell you how old I was the first time I read Stephen King, but I do appreciate that it's just the right amount where you're on edge trying to kind of figure out what's happening, but also not like, yeah, I have to put this down. I can't read this after dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
I read Stephen King. I don't think I understood any of it, but I read it really young and was terrified, and like Anne Rice. And I think it was because I was kind of hungry for it and I was a strong reader, but that was like so inappropriate and I didn't really understand it. And there just weren't options though. I feel like today, spooky middle grade is a big thing. And I feel like even more nudging into that horror space where it's not just atmospheric, but like the kids are actually in danger, even though we were talking about hope and humor mixed in as well. There is an element of danger. I feel like kids, I mean, I'm a middle school teacher. They are hungry for stories that make them feel all of these complicated feelings. I feel like a lot of times there was a big trend with you need to have an important book or an issue book for it to be something that is bought or purchased in a classroom. And I think a lot of, curriculum people still feel that way. But from a teacher perspective, there's so much in spooky and scary books that kids can connect to that it's pretty fun to watch them engage with them.
I know I asked my nephew what he liked about horror, and he explained to me, because I was like, I don't understand it, because growing up, I look back and I see that I watched horror films, but at the time, maybe they weren't as terrifying to me, and they're more so now. But he said it's the adrenaline rush that he gets when watching it, like of what's going to happen, knowing that there has to be some kind of good ending, but you're just on this high of feeling all of these different emotions all at one time. And he really enjoys that. And then being able to connect with his friends if they're all watching or all reading the same thing. So, I mean, that's something, it was something I learned because I didn't realize I was writing a horror. I thought it was a mystery action adventure until somebody told me it was horror. And I was like, no, I don't do that. And they're like, yes, no, that's what you're doing. So I'm
Can
like,
we talk about that for like a second? Because you've said that before, and I'm just like, I've read your book. I love it. I see Jennifer's nodding like, yeah, that's horror. Like, how did you not see that was horror?
Because I didn't read horror, and I don't actively go out and watch a horror film because I'm like, it scares me too much. So it's like, it never even crossed my mind that I could be writing something scary, because I'm like, you don't do that. So, and there was one particular scene with Justin when he wakes up, where he wakes up in the other place, and they're like, no, that is horror now, and do more of that. And I was like, I thought I was doing Goonies. What happened to how did it become that? And so from that point on, when I got that feedback, I then actively tried to make it scary and tried to tap into everything that I'm afraid of. But starting out, never, ever, ever would cross my mind that I would be writing horror novels. Never, ever.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the time when like these type of novels were actually written from maybe the high school level, not middle school level. So like Christopher Pike was really big when I graduated from high school. And for people who don't know, he actually is the person who wrote So I Know What You Did Last Summer. But he wrote it in the 80s, and then they turned it into the movie with Michelle Gellar and Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze in like the late 90s. And it totally feels like that, but I think for the audience that actually appreciates it more. Because I think by the time you're in high school, you're wanting to read more in the adult genre. And so you're not as interested for that. So I think it's a really interesting shift that's kind of happened in publishing, that now that we're doing scary stories for kids. But I mean, scary stories for kids have been popular forever. You know, sitting at the campfire at camp and telling your scary ghost stories and then seeing who stays up all night because they're frightened. That would have been me. Did you use any stories that you heard as a child for inspiration?
I used I'm from Connecticut, and New England in general is like full of folklore and everything's haunted. So the town I grew up in is what South Haven, the fictional town of South Haven, is based on, and actually that's like where Stephen King grew up too. And there was a witch in the town that was hanged before, like 100 years before the Salem witch trial, and she apparently haunts the library where I used to hang out, which is the same library that Quinn and Mike go to do their research. There is an eerie pond that I used to walk my dog around at night, and there was this one storm where all the trees were like broken and falling in it, and it's like, that's scary. What if something, I don't know, this is how my brain works. I'm always like, what if something came out of the water in this moment, So just kind of walking around my old neighborhood where I grew up, the same streets that I would ride my bike up and down and look for haunted things with my friends, I had moved back to as an adult, and had the same exact, I don't know what this says about me, but my brain went to the same place it went to when I was a kid, asking the same kind of haunted questions. But I think a lot of writers do that. I don't know, Dika, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the what ifs, I feel like can just totally set a story in motion. So while maybe it wasn't one campfire story per se, I always wanted that. I always wanted that campfire experience. I wanted someone to scare me when I was a kid. So I guess I just tried to write the story myself.
I'm the opposite of that. For me, it was the chant that's in Hide and Seeker. That's the actual chant we used to play the game in my grandmother's neighborhood, and no one knows where that chant came from. I've gone back as an adult. I've asked friends, family who played the game, and we have no idea where it came from. So it was that mystery, because again, I thought I was writing a mystery of that chant of like, why do we say this creepy thing? Most people just count and hide. Why are we chanting this thing about going up a hill and bloody toes and whatever? Where did that come from? And if you think about it, it's really creepy. And if you think about hide and seek, you're basically hunting other kids for sport. So I just started thinking about all of those things. And I thought, oh, that would make a creepy story if you made it, connected to hide and seek and kids hiding but not being found. And so that was my thought process. So I guess there were a lot of what ifs, like what if this happened and this happened? So you're right. Yeah, that kind of, it's the direction I went to with the story.
That song is so creepy.
Where did it come from? We don't know.
And so do you know how long people have been using that song to do hide and seek? No,
and it's only my grandmother, this one particular street that we played on. So that's the setting for hide and seek. That's the neighborhood I'm imagining as I'm writing it. But it was only that street at my house. We said something different, just that street, that those particular kids, that's what we said.
That makes it creepier.
Yes. Who started this and why?
Yeah, what was the backstory about that could be interesting. So talk about your writing style and how you're kind of already talking about this a little bit, but how you get inspiration. Do you plot? Do you write by the seat of your pants? Do you have to have your desk arranged in a certain way?
Lorien, do you want to go?
Sure. Even the word pantser makes me twitch a little bit. I could show you. This is a binder. On my desk, I have a second one. I'm ridiculous. But But I will say I am in my nice little cozy office, but I don't need to be. I usually don't get to write in here. I can write anywhere. I always just keep a notebook with me, or I'll like print the last page of whatever it is I'm working on, and then I'll just like scribble all over it. So I'm not really precious about how I write or when, but oh, do I need an outline? And I like to outline. I don't know if it's because I'm an English teacher and I appreciate the power of a graphic organizer, but I do. And I like to know that last scene. Usually that's the first thing I think of, is that like big end scene. So I then kind of work my way backwards. But yeah, I don't know. Daka, you're probably going to say that you're a pantser, and I'm going to be like, we can't be friends.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have notebooks. I'm like, oh, here's a piece of paper with the notes. Here's a piece of paper. Here's things. Like, here's the story all over my room. And I'm like, how does it work together? I wish, when I saw that notebook, I'm like, I wish I could do that. I always have good intentions of starting a book like that. I can write an outline, but once I start working, then I go completely off. Like I maybe need a little bit of structure, but I can write the middle scene before the first scene or the last scene. I can write scenes out of order. It's whatever is talking to me at the time. So I tend to think of myself as a little bit of both, but mostly probably a pantser than a plotter. If it's a really complicated story, I might have like bullet points if you need to hit this. But scene by scene, I've tried so many times. I've had the big butcher paper on the wall, like diagramming stuff, and then I've had note cards pasted and ripped them all down. It just never works for me. I just can't stick to that for some reason.
I think most people are somewhere in between. I'm a bit wacky with mine methods.
I love that though. I'm going to try that for the next one.
To be fair, this is for a revision. So for a revision, I feel like I have to be able to move things around and flip. And I have all the Post-it notes on the side that says like whatever. I'm trying to justify it, but I probably don't need two binders for the same manuscript. They're both the same.
I want to do that.
I also really just like office supplies.
No, that's better than like, I wrote that on a sticky, but where is it? Like, where did I put that sticky? And it's like, now it's gone, start over. So
yeah, I mean, I'm not a writer, but I have to admit that I'm obsessively organized. And like, I spent 20 minutes the other day looking for a piece of paper that had a list I had written on it that I guess I accidentally threw away. But like, I was like, where is that list? I have to have that list back. It had all the things I needed to do today. But so for the obsessive organizer, I actually have a funny story. I know a YA author who writes her whole first draft and then deletes it.
No, I would cry.
And then starts over.
Mm-mm.
No, that's a horror story. That right there. No, thank you. It could be garbage, but that will stay a file somewhere.
Like if I've forgotten to save changes, then that might send me into a tizzy of like, oh my gosh, like for a minute, I'm like, what happened? You know, like, so to lose a whole draft, no, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Lorien, I did want to ask you though, with your having everything and being organized and having the notebook, do you feel like then you're able to complete your manuscript quicker?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so what is your general timeline? Like, I'm always interested to know how quickly someone writes.
That varies if I'm teaching or not. In general, I can usually do like, and we're going to say drafts, two drafts of like two different manuscripts a year.
Okay.
And then like whatever edits need to be done in between. So when I'm Stitchers is with Abrams. So they took like a year to give me my edit letter for the Stitchers. So I wrote book 2 while I waited. And then I wrote, I think I drafted book 3 or something, but they're just really bare bones. And that's why then I print them and put them in binders, because then I like have to flesh it out. I'm like really bare bones in my first drafts. They're really short usually. Okay. But it does help me because then it's like, okay, this is what I need to do first. this is what I need to do. It like helps me compartmentalize a little more, especially like when you have a day job, like I know you do too. When I get home, I have to shut off school and then turn on writing. And it helps me if I have it in little pieces, like, okay, this is what this scene I'm going to work on today. So I found it helps with that. And you could still have your Post-it notes and your little scraps of paper.
Oh, that's good. In reading and starting the second novel, I realized it was so much harder because the first novel, it could be like 6 years. I'm waiting to get an editor, an agent, and I've been working on it for all this time. But with the second book, it's like, okay, you have 2 months. And it's like, no one ever said that or told me that. So I was just in shock of like, how am I supposed to do this when I had 6 years to write the first one? But it's,
and like a million people get to read the first one before it even makes it to the publishing house. And this one, it's like, nope. Yeah.
Just and hope for the best. Yes, that's where I am right now.
So since you guys have started since we're talking a little bit more about writing style, do you work, like, not workshop is not the right word, but do you have alternate readers? Do you have a writing group that you kind of share things among? Kind of how do you do that?
I have a couple critique partners. So critique partners who will read like the entire manuscript or read sections of it, or other ones where it's just like, I have an idea, this isn't working out, and verbally we'll talk it through. So it's just different people helping at different stages. And that really helps. And I, especially for the second book, that is happens so much quicker. It's like you need those people, because before you can like go out to all these other places and take all these workshops and have all these people read it for you and pay them to read it. It's like, no, it's a short period of time. And so you need those true and tried friends, partners to like be able to read it and give you feedback quicker. And that really helps me because I find that they always bring up things I never even thought about and gives me additional insight that are so, so helpful. So I truly recommend that.
I couldn't find my unmute button. Same. You need those people. And sometimes it's just like a group chat. What do you think of this idea? Is this like completely, wild and will never work? Or will you look at this manuscript? Yes, again, because I want to send it to my agent. Or I had to, even after getting my book deal for Fright Watch, I had my original agent left the business. So then I had to query again, like in the middle of everything. So then I had to have a new manuscript because I couldn't query my 2 Fright Watch books. So then that's the one that's turning into the 3rd Fright Watch book. But like I needed people to read that manuscript and my query letter. And then, it's a constant exchange. But I think that's what makes it feel like a community. Writing isn't as solitary as people, I think, assume it is. And I knew this coming into it, but I am still shocked at how many people have touched this book, like have worked on it, like just proofreaders and marketers and school like people. And it's just wild, like how many people have a hand in making of the book. So I guess my advice would be, if anybody is wanting to be an author, get yourself some friends who will read and brainstorm with you and, hash out ideas, because collaboration is such a big part of the process once you get published.
Have you ever gone back to read the first draft? The first idea?
The very first one that I wrote that in 2012, and I don't think I want to, but I did look at like old query letters when I was re-querying, and they all deserved to reject me completely. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did find a story I wrote in 1994 when I was in middle school, and that was real cringy. So
I've gone back to look at stuff and I was like,
did.
Okay, that's why you've learned so much since
then.
Yeah. Or it's just like the characters have changed, the setting has changed, all of this has changed. Look how far the book has transitioned to what it is now. And just kind of seeing all of that is fun to kind of go back and look at sometimes.
Did your title change?
You know what? It used to be Hyde with the Y.
Oh,
Mr.
because of Hyde. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's the only thing that changed, but a lot of the kids' names changed, the setting changed. It was in Georgia versus Tennessee. Some of those things changed.
Mine was Bits and Pieces, and it was the South Haven Mysteries. So Fright Watch sounds cooler.
Yeah. I like Fright Watch. Yeah.
Definitely sounds more horror and less mystery.
South Haven Mysteries, yeah.
So, can we talk about covers? Just because I think a lot of people think that as an author, you make all the choices, right? And covers are definitely one of those things that you generally make none of the choices.
Daka, I'm going to let you take this one first because you had strong opinions on your cover.
Yes. So I remember the day I was driving. I was in Santa Monica. I had arrived at somewhere for work. I got an email. I was in the parking lot and I opened it up and I got heart palpitations. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is too scary. This is too scary. And so I emailed it to my dad and my sister. And I was like, what am I going to do? It's too scary. We're going to scare the kids. And they both were like on a conference call with me in the middle of this parking lot saying, it's brilliant. It is so great. Kids are going to love it. They love scary. My teacher teaches 6th grade. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I'm terrified. And they're like, you're you. That's why you're terrified. It's great. And I have to tell you that my friends blew it up to like this huge poster and framed it for me. I love it. It's under my bed because I had it in my room facing me in the middle of the night. I would wake up and like freak out. So I love my friends. I love the gift, but I can't see it because it is a great cover. They did an amazing job. I think they let me give a little bit of feedback on the character's hair, a little bit of the monster, but it's perfect. And I love it now, but it still scares me, which is a good thing, I think. But it's brilliant. I couldn't ask for a better cover. So, but I'm just a scaredy cat. So that's just me.
Kids would be delighted to know that your cover scares you. My students are 7th graders and they love your book. They love this cover. And I feel like every time I look at it, I see new things. Like I never really noticed the houses in the background until I'm just looking at it. I was all for scary with mine. My editor asked me kind of what I wanted. And I said, I don't want cutesy. I don't like how gendered books are in middle grade. Like you have to have a cutesy little girl and then the colors will be, I feel like we're getting away from that and that's a good thing. But I didn't want my book to be like a girl book or this kind of book. I just wanted it to be a book that kids would think looked cool. And so they just brought the concept and showed me a really rough sketch and I really loved it. I thought it looked kind of like a throwback. To like a bit old school horror. So yeah, I didn't really have they did ask me actually if I liked the idea of the oldies being like in the window and the kids running away from the pond, and that was if you asked me what is the image of the book that you would want, it was that. So I feel like my editor and I were in sync. But saying that, they're changing my cover a little bit, so it's funny that Jennifer, you mentioned that, because they just bought the 3rd one. They are not big tweaks, but they're making the Fright Watch the big thing instead of the title. So the paperback of the Stitchers, this will be really big. This will be small. Same with the collectors and then the 3rd one. And so that was a little bit of a shock because I'm so used to looking at it. Like I'm so used to seeing the Stitchers big and red. And then when she sent it to me, my husband's like, it's not that different. It's literally everything else is the same. It's the same words. It's just one is bigger than the other. And I was like, I know, but it's weird. So I'm over it now. I've had a week to.
And I didn't notice the oldies in the window until you said, I'm like, wait, how did I not? I missed that.
I missed that
too. I love
too.
the color scheme of this. And it reminded me a little bit of some of the Goosebumps books. A little bit I love.
That's what they were going for with the title, I think.
Yeah.
But And I like that our books are similar colors. I feel like they
Yes,
look good
they are.
together.
They match.
So, do you have advice for aspiring writers?
Read a lot. Maybe not in the genre that you, I don't know how if you're like this, Daka, but I have trouble reading middle grade when I'm working on a middle grade project. I'm working on a young adult project right now. So, which is, just like a little older, but I've been reading a lot of middle grade right now, but I have trouble reading spooky, scary middle grade when I'm in the middle of writing one. But other than that, read a lot, read. I feel like that's advice for everybody in the world, but read.
Yeah, read everything. And for me too, it's like, don't compare your writing to someone else's, because I would read Lorien's book and I'm like, what am I doing? How am I supposed to write anything now? Look how brilliant this is.
Same,
Like,
I was doing the same thing.
So I'm like, but it's like, don't compare, because people have different writing styles and they're writing what they enjoy, and just sort of be yourself, write what you like and enjoy to do, and be kind to yourself too. I think when you're writing, if you have these bad days where you're like, I can't be creative, it's okay. Like, pick it up the next day. But I think, and read a lot. That's the most important one, I think.
No, being kind is actually, I feel like that's probably even more important than reading a lot, because you can get inspiration anywhere. But even like being a debut during a pandemic was kind of rough. But like when I start to reread sections of the Stitchers, like if I'm doing a reading or something, I'm like, oh, I don't know, I could have made that so much better. But I feel like that's the point. It's a craft, it's a process that you're just going to always get better. My editor told me, like, she's now read 3 books from me, and she's like, you become such a better writer from the Stitchers. And that feels like that should be the goal. Like, you should be getting better. I should be a better writer now than I was when I wrote the Stitchers. So kind of just being gentle with yourself and knowing that it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
That you're always growing, that your writing's going to always grow and change.
And have fun too. I'm like, we're storytellers for kids, like creating these things. There's joy to be had in that. So that's what I tell myself when I'm like, what are you doing? You're horrible. I have those things. So, when you're like, you need that encouragement, sometimes you have to encourage yourself, but no, you're like, but what are you doing? You're writing things you want kids to enjoy. So that's important.
That is super important.
So I just want to remind everybody who's listening, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. And so I'm going to ask, do you guys have questions of each other?
Yes, we have. Before we started, Deacon and I were like rattling off questions. And now I can't remember if you answered it while we were recording or not. No, I was going to ask you, because as you kind of mentioned with your cover conversation, did you answer this recording already about becoming a horror writer, even though you don't like horror?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I did answer it a lot, but I think you posed a great question on Instagram and Twitter about who's your favorite monster. And that really got me thinking, because I said Frankenstein, because I tend to go for like the monsters who I feel like are misunderstood in some kind of way. It's like, he didn't want to be created. Like, it wasn't his fault. Like, some things where there's more to them. But as more people started posting monsters, I was like, oh no, that's a good one. And I used to watch that movie. There's Godzilla, there's Swamp Thing, there's Freddy. I'm like, so you were somewhat involved in horror, even if you weren't reading books. You were watching movies. Maybe it's just because your friends were watching and you felt like you had to be in the conversation or something. So there was some horror in my childhood, but for some reason, as I've gotten older, I'm more afraid now than maybe I was as a kid, or I didn't realize it then. So I didn't, again, that's why I didn't think I was writing horror, because now as an adult, I'm like, even if I see a commercial, I saw the It commercial. Anytime I see the clown, I'm like, I gotta turn it off. Like I have that feeling. I'm so sensitive now. And I'm like, was I not then? So that's why, again, I didn't realize I was writing something scary, because as an adult, that wouldn't have been something I would do.
I totally hear you about the being more sensitive and scared now. And I think it's because as adults, we know the real horrors of the world, and like the real monsters are always humans. That's why I could never write an adult horror book, because I couldn't write about serial killers or like human monsters. I could write about fake or mythological creatures or something like that, because in my heart of hearts I don't believe in them. But yeah, as an adult, I think the scariest thing we both wrote about is losing someone you love.
Mhm.
And there is no monster like scarier than that. And I don't know, I hear you. I feel like the older I get, the more scared of everything I get. But I also think you should write about a clown if you are afraid of clowns, because I feel like you can channel that energy and write something very deliciously scary.
So have you ever written anything that scared you as an adult as you're writing it? Do you have those feelings as you're writing something, or you're writing something, you're like, oh no, that's too much, and you pull back because you're afraid in the moment?
Not because I'm afraid. I don't know how. I think there's a big difference between spooky middle grade and middle grade horror. And I feel like I'm trying to get more in that horror space. And I'll admit, I'm not sure how much I'm ever supposed to push it or how much I'm allowed to push it. And I feel like my editor keeps nudging me and saying, you can be scarier. You can be scarier. So like every book, it will get hopefully like a little scarier, a little scarier, a little scarier. But there's nothing I'm scaring myself on. The parts that are hard for me to write are the sad parts. Sometimes like those moments where Quinn is feeling really, really, kind of lost in her grief. Those were harder for me to write. But the scary stuff, I'm kind of like wanting to go a little more. But again, writing about things I don't believe in.
And I feel like I'm almost the opposite. Those moments of the grief are the fear and the loss, because it feels like it's almost therapy for me. For writing Hide and Seeker, I was dealing with grief and loss and fear. So in a way, I was able to channel that through the characters on the page. And I was able to work through it at some distance. Like there was a safe space for me because it wasn't happening to me. The characters were going through it. And it's sort of the same for this new book. So it's almost like whatever I'm going through at the time, I translate it into a story for kids who are also possibly dealing with those emotions. It's almost my version of a therapy session for myself. But I did want to follow up really quickly on what you said, spooky versus horror. What are you considering the difference?
I think atmosphere, but I could be wrong. I don't know what publishing, I've never asked. I don't know what publishing considers the difference, but I'm thinking like books that I read that I'm like, oh, that was kind of spooky. To me, I'm like, that's atmospheric, but the kids aren't really in danger. Like maybe they meet a ghost and they have to help the ghost cross over or something of that nature. Whereas, Justin and his friends they're in danger, like straight up danger. Quinn is in danger. In my own brain, I think that's the difference, but I honestly don't know if publishing agrees with me. I know my publisher is starting to use the term middle grade horror when they talk about my book, whereas before they were saying spooky middle grade. It's all semantics, but
I get that too from my editors. Like, amp up the horror, amp up the spooky, like go for it, and be terrifying. And I'm like, okay. So then it's like tapping into those things that terrify me, which there are a lot, and then just putting them in the book. So I get that you're saying it's like it is like at a different level, the horror versus the spooky. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions that you have for each other?
Oh, Lorien, your book ends on a perfect cliffhanger to me, and so I know you can't give too much away, but I wanted you to talk about a little bit the next book and what we can expect.
The next book is The Collectors, and it picks up literally where the Stitchers leaves off. So those ladies in white all move in and take the place of the oldies. And I guess I can say it. It's on the back of the book. It's a ghost cult. They want to recruit Lex, who is one of Quinn's besties from the Stitchers, the one with like the short hair, who's like really into fashion. And so they want to recruit her to be one of the ghost daughters. But obviously Lex doesn't know. Quinn is picking up on it, and Mike is like has PTSD from the first book. And he's like, no, there are like we dealt with one set of monsters. Like, there's no way that something else is on our street. So they have to, she has to do a little convincing. So yeah, it picks up. And the kind of reasoning I had behind it, well, I guess I can't say the reasoning because I would give away the stitchers. I do have a habit of doing that. So I'm going to rewind, pull that back, and just say, you have to read it. Are you going to do a sequel to Hide and Seeker?
That is the question. This next one isn't necessarily a sequel to that one because it's like a different set of kids, but there are some like shout outs, some Easter eggs connected. And I'm hoping that then the third book, which is sort of untitled, we don't know what it's going to be, that maybe that could be a sequel or something else. But I don't know yet. I would like to visit those kids again. I don't know about you, but once a book ends, it takes me a while to get over it because I'm like, I'm going to miss them. Like I've been spending all of this time with these kids and this world, and now I'm really bad at goodbyes. So having something end bothers me. So I would like to pick back up and see what they're doing now. Are they better? Like, something else. But I'm hopeful that there will be, but this is a completely different story.
You asked me earlier if it is quicker to write, if the process goes quicker, if you have an outline. When you write a sequel, I can tell you flat out, it goes quicker when you write a sequel as well. Just
really?
Yeah, because you already know the characters, and you already know the setting. So you're already like, you don't have to get to know anybody. You're just like, oh, diving back in. Oh, I'm Justin again. And it just feels very, I don't know, it feels like you never kind of left. So,
you know what, this might be different for you since you are like a plotter, but sometimes I can be writing and it won't be until like I'm like 50 pages in that I know who the character is.
Like no, it does take me a while for new characters. I guess I've just been with Quinn for a while. Since 2012.
So talk about how you develop your characters.
Feels like a century ago. I have to be careful because I'm a teacher and I write about middle school kids and I teach middle school kids. I never really want those lines to cross. I don't really want to accidentally put anybody in the book or turn my students into caricatures or something like that. So it took me forever to name Quinn and Mike. And the reason I named them Quinn and Mike is because I had never taught a Quinn or a Mike until this year. Now I have 2 Mikes, but I had never taught. For some reason, nobody is named Michael anymore. So it took a lot of like I always listen to how my students talk and their banter. So those kinds of things I pay attention to. But there was a girl in my neighborhood who was always on a skateboard walking her dog. And then she would be running with a boy and they would be flirting, but it was so like they didn't know they were flirting. And I just would spy and it was adorable. And I was like, I want those 2 in here. So that was it. I kind of just like, I think it happens, like Daka said, like it takes a little while to get into the voice of your character. And I honestly can't remember that process. Daka, you probably have a better answer.
And I know for me, I tend to use people in my life or friends I had as kids, like Shay, the character in the book who's sort of annoying. That my sister's name is Shay. I told her she's not as annoying as the character, but she's in there.
Oh my goodness.
Carla, the bully, is actually a friend from childhood who was actually a good friend. She was such a good friend in middle school. But I don't know why I just used her name because I wanted to have her name in the book. She was somebody I remembered, haven't talked to in, years, but I just wanted sort of an homage to her in some kind of way. And again, Lyric, I said it's sort of like my cousin. So I just take little personalities of different people in my life and I like alter them slightly or amplify them. Justin actually is probably more like me than anybody in the book. Just again, because of the grief and the loss and everything that he's going through at the time. I do. But I think it's probably like you where I could be outside walking around and I'll see a kid or see someone and I'm like, they have a great personality. How can I use that in some kind of way in the book, or, magnify it or do something? So it's just usually people in my world or environment that I see, and I try to incorporate them into different characters.
So you've already kind of talked on my, are you working on something new? Which is fine. So one of you is writing a sequel and one of you is writing what seems to be a book that might be partially in the same world, but it's completely different. So is the writing process different for that?
I mean, for me, it is, just because it's like new kids. And I tend to, I love kids working together, ordinary kids being heroes in their worlds in some kind of way. So I write like there's multiple kids again. I just, for some reason, that works for me, where there's like a group that are working together. So now it's creating completely new personalities, new voices, new likes and dislikes for these characters. So it took me a while to get in that mode of knowing who these kids are. And again, that whole thing of like, you have a shorter amount of time to write the second one. I just actually received my edit notes back. So this weekend is all about reading the notes, going through, and then starting the rewrite process. But I feel, I guess it just depends on what the story is, if you feel like you have a complete grasp of it, of what you're doing, that sort of determines how quickly you can go through it. And for me, if there's an emotional component that a character is going through, really understanding what that is and being willing to put that on the page in some kind of way, sometimes can take me a while.
I think my process is pretty much the same. I have to always digest, like if I get my edit letter, I'll read it like quickly, and then I'll put it away and I'll panic for, I don't know, maybe 2 days of solid. I don't know how to write. I don't know how to do this. I forgot how to revise every single time. And then I will slowly, like I'll print it out and I'll just look at it in steps. Like, okay, how will I do this? How will I tackle this? How will I tackle that? And I think that's because that's that kind of organized part of my chaotic brain where I just have to like compartmentalize and go piece by piece by piece. But the process for me, anytime I start something new, like I'm starting to get an idea for something not Fright Watch related, but it would be middle grade horror. And the first thing I always have to do is make a playlist. And it sounds really silly, but I feel like I can't write without having a soundtrack. Because I have a commute to work every day. And I feel like when I'm put on my soundtracks, I can think and work through some plotting things when I'm driving. And it doesn't, like, the lyrics usually have nothing to do. It's nothing the kids would listen to in the book, but it, like, the tone of it or the energy of it will help me kind of like visualize a scene like a movie. So right now one is spinning constantly in my head that I'm kind of itching to write. So that's not in the South Haven universe. So we'll see if my process takes longer when I start to write that one.
That's interesting, the playlist. I've seen a lot of people do that. I'm like, do I need a playlist? What do I need? I just kind of sit and go. Like I don't even have to be at a desk. It's just wherever I am, or even walking. If I'm walking, then I just start recording things on my phone. Like if
interesting.
I just press record and just start talking it out. But I sometimes need to be away from the house or and out in the open, and things come faster to my brain. But I just have to record it because I won't remember it by the time I get back home.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that's about all we have today. So I want to thank you guys for this great discussion and for joining us. And for everybody who's watching, if you would like to purchase copies of these books, you can get them from Monkey and Dog. They are one of our local independent bookstores. They do all children's books. And I have their contact information on the screen for you. And we will have another youth author visit on Wednesday, April 14th at 6:30 with Tailor and Ryan. And if you'd like to attend, please register by visiting our website, fortworthlibrary.org. And if you click on April 14th, there'll be a link for the webpage, and then you can register. So thank you very much. Everyone have a nice evening, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.